On your Friday episode of Locked On Raptors, it's Precious Achiuwa Day. He's a super interesting player going into the season. Had a wonderful close to last year after, let's say, an up and down first half. We're going to dig into all the questions about Precious going into the year. Will he start? Will he come off the bench? What does that mean for everybody else if he is going to start? And what are the high and low end outcomes for a guy who's shown a lot of promise, but of course is still very, very green? We'll get to all that with special guest Samson Folk of Raptors Republic coming up in just 1 second. Thanks for being here.
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? Welcome to episode number 1245 of Locked On Raptors for Friday, September the 16th. I'm your host, Sean Woodley of RaptorsHQ.com. You can find me on Twitter, as always, at WoodleySean. You can find the show at Locked On Raptors, and you can follow, subscribe to, rate, and review the podcast wherever you get your podcast for the low, low price of On the House. You can also go to YouTube and subscribe to the video version of the show each and every day as well, and it's always appreciated when you support the show, whichever way you support the show, and it's always appreciated when you make us your first listen of the day. All right, on today's show, we are joined by one of my favorite guests, one of the czars of Raptors Internet, and a wonderful podcaster in his own right. It is the one, the only, Samson Folk. Samson, how's it going, pal?
I'm doing good. Just kind of kicking around. Excited to talk about Precious because I think he's probably the most interesting developmental guy for the Raptors over the past season. And I think it should be really interesting to kind of scope out how that's going to shake out coming into this upcoming season.
I'm with you. I think he is probably the most interesting guy. I mean, you could get into Scotty Barnes and like the whole meteoric rise that dude's on, and that's certainly interesting. And there's not a lack of interesting players on this very weird and interesting team, but Precious is the guy who, I've kind of pointed out before. I think he's the guy who can make whatever this vision is the team is going for actually kind of work if he can pull off certain things and offer the team skills that you typically ask for from a center, from a guy who's 6'8", 6'9", who can put the ball on the deck and do all the things that Precious can do. And I believe we convened the last time you were on the show was actually to review Precious's season. So it's kind of fun that we're coming full circle to preview what's going to be on tap for him this year. And so I guess let's just start broad and then we can kind of go narrow from there. What are your expectations for Precious this year? Because I don't really know. I know I'm supposed to have hard takes, but I don't really know what to expect from Precious this season. I guess it's tied to what his role is going to be. Is he going to start, come off the bench? That's obviously a big determining factor here. But what are your just base expectations for year two of Precious in Toronto?
I think I expect him to succeed at what he's already succeeded at. And
Right.
that's primarily defense. I think that there's all defensive selections for him in the future. Maybe him above anybody else on the roster, truthfully.
Sure.
He had stretches of defense that Pascal had some, there's that video of him blocking Jimmy Butler twice. That game for Pascal against Miami was a really, really high point for him. But Precious probably had the most impressive sustained defense over the course of the season. And that's correlated in the winning minutes, the way better effective field goal percentage they allow. They rebound better with him out there. And he is the guy, if there is a guy, that makes the center problems, if he succeeds at what he's meant to, he makes those a lot smaller. And then offensively, the touch was in a really tragic place for so long. And then it got better. And he was finishing more contested layups, typically off his own dribble and stuff like that. It's not like he ever got good at rolling, which is that's too bad. But the interesting aspect of his offense, despite his defense being really great, is that he took more catch and shoot threes than Gary Trent Jr. post All-Star break. And he took 5 per 36. And he took, I believe it was 4 in his 26 or 27 minutes on the floor, and he hit 40% of them. And some of those were above the break as well. And as we know, the Raptors, they crash guys at the glass because they can't space the floor out above the break unless it is Fred or Gary. Even OG is typically positioned in the corners. And Precious, if he can step into that role and start making above the break threes, I think that really does radically change how the Raptors can configure their lineups and probably adds a significant ceiling to what they want to do.
Definitely. And I guess the question is how much do you buy what we saw at the end of the season, right? Like it's a pretty
Hmm.
tiny sample. He was, I think, asked to do a lot because there were a lot of injuries for the team. OG missed time, Fred was out. Like they kind of needed his 3-point shooting to have any hope of anything resembling like spatial, like success on the floor. And so he was kind of thrust into that and he performed very well. Like, do you think that it's reasonable to expect him to kind of carry over what we saw after the All-Star break last year? I mean, guys figure things out. He's 23 this season. Like that just tends to happen, and guys can, just get good at a thing, or it could just be a 2-month flash in the pan. And we're talking about early season Precious Achiuwa, where he's throwing up bricks all the time. Like, where do you think it's gonna? Like, it's probably somewhere in the middle, if we're being totally honest. But what's your level of belief that the 3-point shooting that we saw at the end of last season is actually real for him?
I think I'm probably sitting in the middle that at least for next season, I could never say what Precious will be like in 5 years as a shooter, but for next season,
Yeah.
I think it's probably safe to, if he's shooting above the break threes at like 32, 33% and hitting, a higher percentage in the corners, I think that that's enough that the Raptors can look at putting him in the starting lineup or something like that, just to provide
Hmm.
enough spacing because Precious, a lot of his uptick in offense was, it relied on his 3-point shooting because Precious is a very dangerous player. He has the fluidity to pump, put a drop dribble down and attack the basket. We saw that against the 76ers in the series. Fred couldn't get into the heart of the defense, like off a swing pass. Neither could Gary. OG
Hmm.
could, Precious could, and Pascal was the guy operating from the point of attack. They had nothing else.
Yeah.
And Precious needs to be able to, I guess, he needs to make people respect him from the line and he needs to draw closeouts because it might get a little bit hairy if he's not able to do that because offensively he still doesn't succeed or excel in the finer points of cutting, spacing, rolling, any of the classic big man stuff.
Sure.
And that stuff can improve too. You never really know. It's just not something he's shown kind of any inkling at being good at so far.
For sure. And so I guess like let's just dig into it. The starter question. I've been on team start Precious, move Gary to the bench, let him be the sixth man he was very clearly born to be. That's kind of where I'm at going into the season. I don't think that's going to be the starting lineup when the season opens. Like I think they'll probably roll with Gary as the starting two, and then go with the small look that we saw last year that had varying degrees of success, but mostly came out even in the wash by the end of the season. And so like where are you at with that? Like, do you want to see Precious start? Do you need to wait and see if he can sort of harness some of those more big man like skills, picking, popping, rolling, things like that, before you sort of make the call to slot him in? And then it's like a tough political decision, right? Like Gary Trent Jr. is a starter and he's going into a contract year as he's got the opt out after this season. Like, it's not an easy call to make, but where are you at with if you were Nick Nurse, like, would you be pulling the trigger on that move from day one, or is this something you kind of wait for as the season progresses?
I'd start Precious. I think
Yeah.
the Raptors, they have so much continuity going into next year. They know they have a lot of lineups that work, but
Hmm.
they also know that they haven't hit the highs that the contenders, the contending tier of the Eastern Conference has been able to hit. Precious Achiuwa, it feels pretty clear to me that guy has a higher ceiling than Gary. And
Yeah.
Gary is a guy who, if Precious doesn't hit anything, then obviously it becomes untenable. That's not something you can do. And Gary was a huge boon for the Raptors. Their offense was much better with him on the floor last year. And the
Hmm.
defense is obviously a different story, but yeah, Precious I would start out with to just you take a punch at the ceiling. And the Raptors have those like no guard lineups that worked last year. You see if those start working again. And another thing that's maybe a bit worrying is that Precious and Boucher, they played really great together last year. And I wonder if you put Precious in the starting lineup, if you kind of take a little bit of that away. But I do really wonder if I would go with Precious just as like the standalone and see how things break down from there. But I don't think that will be the case. I think Gary will start.
Yeah, I think as I said all summer long, I'm in total agreement with you. I think just the defensive floor that lineup in theory will have, where you've got Fred, OG, Siakam, Barnes, and Precious. Like it literally was in the 100th percentile of defensive efficiency in the very small sample that we saw it in last year. Also the second percentile offensively. So there's that to be considered as well, as, you know, that's the most Raptors ass lineup you could possibly conceive. But yeah, I really do think that it's taking a shot at kind of hitting the peak that this team is going to be capable of. And had the lineup with Gary in there, the small look where you're kind of asking Scotty to wear many hats and he's playing center and Pascal's being tasked with being that back end defender who's doing so much. Like, had that lineup actually produced incredible results last year, I might be more inclined to let it ride to begin the year, but they didn't. You know, I was expecting them at some point to get on a heater and start to rack up those numbers where they did look like a pretty, you know, formidable group, but it just never got there. They basically broke even, and I think it's probably worth just giving it a shot with Precious because of all that we've talked about. I do want to get more into his defense, Samson, in just one second here, and sort of the ways that the Raptors can use him to maybe address some of the issues or concerns that some Raptors fans have had with the aggression and the sort of everything is a hammer and or everything is a nail and we are the hammer and we only do it the one way type of thing that we've seen from the Raptors defensively at times in the last, I guess, just last season, really. We'll get to that in just one second here. But first, I want to tell you about our friends over at betonline.net, your number one source for all your pro and college football betting needs and sports info this season. You can find all the latest football league developments, game matchups, news and podcasts, injury reports, all that good stuff. You got the week 2 games on tap very soon here, so go and make yourself the informed wager before you put some bets down on Sunday. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sporting wagering information, including live betting, esports scores. You got futures bets. You can go beyond the NFL, of course, as well. You've got MLB playoffs very, very close. You got NHL and NBA season starting up, so you can put some futures bets down. MMA, boxing, golf, it's all there. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action. BetOnline is where the game starts. And we continue on here talking Precious Achiuwa with Samson Folk, one of the foremost Precious Achiuwa acolytes that I interact with. That's for damn sure. So the defense, you know, like we just said, if he's in the starting 5 or whenever he's on the floor, he's bringing really, really sound defense at like basically any position you want him to like. You need him to guard smalls, he can go do that. You need him to play center, he can go do that. And he can kind of float and do the Raptors thing where you cover tons of ground and get out of position for fun and then just try to make up ground to see just because you can. That's been a successful defense at times, and they were a top 10 defense by the end of last year per cleaning the glass, which is nothing to, you know, like just totally shake off or anything like that. It seems like it works when it's really all humming, but I think there have been plenty of calls from folks who watch the team, myself, I think you included as well, that maybe you just take advantage of the immense defensive talent on this team, the incredible length, the in theory switchability, and maybe play a little bit more of a conservative style where you're not putting all of your energy into forcing turnovers and getting on the run, and instead maybe you're conserving some of that energy for, you know, late in games or the offensive end of the floor, whatever it might be. So defensively with Precious, like, do you think he can be a guy who can sort of open them up to doing some different things defensively if he were to be in that starting 5, playing more than 22, 23 minutes a game? Like, if he can get up to around 29, 30 minutes a night, like, does that open up some avenues, do you think, for the Raptors to kind of chill the hell out on defense?
I think that he definitely can. Pascal in very small sample size was 97th percentile in drop defense. I wouldn't buy into that. It's just a fun little thing. Yeah. Precious, I think, is the avenue to good drop defense for the Raptors. And, you know, if you play more conservative drop defense, you can still lean on, honestly, like Fred is one of the best tag men in the NBA.
Yeah.
You know, OG Anunoby is a really great nail defender. Pascal Siakam he has a lot of space eating ability on defense. It's just, if you let those guys stay closer to their man and you let Precious handle things in drop, which I think he's shown a capability to do so, it makes the Raptors less. It's a term Blake uses actually all the time, is the scheme preparedness thing, right?
Hi, Blake.
Yeah. it's the thing where teams, they kind of get accustomed or prep according to what the Raptors are doing. And it's like, hey, you know, role player number 7, if you're going to get like 9 open 3-point attempts today, you usually take 3, take 9. And they're NBA players and they can get out on top of the Raptors that way. And I don't think the Raptors will be a predominantly drop team at any point in time, but I
Yeah.
think that they do kind of they go to zone to mix it up, but I think that they could also start going to more drop, honestly. And when
Hmm.
you have a diverse defense, I think that it takes teams a little while to get adjusted to that. And I think that you can really steal some. You can get a lot of stops by switching up defense as long as you're comfortable and you have the guys to do it. And I think Precious gives them an avenue to drop defense at the very least. I don't think that'll be predominantly what they do, but it's
Hmm.
there for sure.
Yeah, I mean, what was the calling card of the championship team? It's that every time down the floor, Marc Gasol was calling out something new, and they were just basically adapting the coverage to what the possession called for. And I don't ever expect Precious Achiuwa to be Marc Gasol. Marc Gasol, he is not. Marc Gasol, no one on this team is. But there's enough, I think, collective defensive instinct there between, Fred and Pascal, who I don't think Pascal got enough credit for the way he kind of captained the defense last year and was just forced to clean up so many messes. You throw in OG, who we know is incredible. I feel like Scotty, like that dude just understands the game better than most. And so like I feel like that's gonna come along for him too. It does feel like you almost have the collective instincts there if you throw Precious in as well, who we've seen can just be just like a very forceful, like, sorry, there's nothing you can do about me because I'm just the most athletic person in the league type defender, that you probably can pull off a bit more of a diverse scheme where you're just sort of able to change things up based on what the moment calls for. Again, it's never going to be that 2019 team because that was just like a confluence of incredible
Mhm.
basketball geniuses all coming together. But you'd have to think it's something. It's not like Nick Nurse doesn't know this either, right? Like, I'm sure he's aware that maybe things got a little monotonous and predictable at times last year. And I fully am on board with the idea that Precious can be maybe the agent to kind of allow them to just kind of lay back, play drop defense, even if it's not a drop. Like, even if his length doesn't give him like the Brook Lopez ability to sort of contest everything in the mid range and sort of cover all that ground, he's just so bloody fast and quick and mobile that it feels like that's going to overcome some things like his deficiencies as well. So I would like to see a bit of change there. Is there a thing that you like watching Precious do on defense the most, Samson?
I think probably his ability to step out on the stronger strength creators in the NBA. This was
Mm-hmm.
when I wrote that piece. We talked about the piece on the last episode we did, but that
Mm-hmm.
piece way back in January, one of the, when you go through the Precious film, he was really quarterbacking the defense to some degree since November. They were winning a
Mm-hmm.
lot of defensive possessions with him. And a big part of that, it kind of crescendoed with his picking up Giannis like at three-quarter court and
Yeah,
Giannis not being able to bully him to the rim, Precious being able to stand his ground so that digs were really effective because a lot of guys try and defend Giannis to the point where you can come in and dig down on him, but they don't have the strength or the foot speed to hang with him, and the dig comes too late, or it's an end one or something. And
sure.
Precious is a guy who on Jimmy Butler has stepped out, on LeBron James has stepped out, on Luka Doncic has stepped out, on Giannis has stepped out, and there's varying degrees of like elite athleticism there as far as foot speed, first step, but all those guys are incredibly strong.
Sure.
Precious hung with all of them when they put the shoulder down. And that means that he, late shot clock, mid shot clock can step out on some of the star wings in the NBA. But also, when we think about that game against the Hawks, when the Hawks stopped running pick and roll because
Mm-hmm.
Precious was doing so well in drop that they stopped doing it. They just wanted Trey to ISO because Precious was complicating. Like Trey
And that
coming
worked
off the
very well when they started ISOing him on OG. Yeah, it
yes,
was awesome.
yes. And Trey comes off the edge and Precious can just flip his hips and like pin him at the rim. It's a really rare mix of defensive talents for Precious. And not to mention the Raptors were way better at rebounding the other team's misses with him on the floor. It's just he
Mhm.
does so much of the big man stuff defensively that we kind of attribute to, you talked about Brook Lopez and drop will also be dependent on how good Fred and Gary are at lock and trail largely,
Sure,
right?
sure.
That's really important. But Precious definitely, he's a very rare mix of talents off defense. So I don't think it's about finding something new that works all the time, but it's more so about finding a diverse set of defense that you can kind of throw it at other offenses more often. And there's a lot of ways to lower minutes for players by doing this. There's a lot of ways to keep guys a little bit more well rested by doing this. And, maybe that's not the case in the postseason. Maybe they do want to be constant flurry team all the time in postseason. But I think that every team needs to have some diversity to what they do. And Precious will definitely allow them more diversity defensively if they lean into it.
Yeah, and I feel like they will. And I find myself getting very excited thinking about what this team could be defensively as well. When you also factor in the pieces they're bringing in off the bench, it just seems like a very good collection of defensive players that is going to mostly be returning from last year and be schooled in the system and kind of understand what's going on and how to work with one another, each other's sort of idiosyncrasies. Otto Porter Jr. being the one major addition, that dude knows how to play high level defense. He just did it. He'll be fine, I'm sure. And yeah, I find myself the offense, yeah, it might be a struggle as it was last year at times. I think it'll probably be a little bit smoother with hopefully, some internal growth shooting wise from guys like Precious and others. But the defense is really what's got me juiced to watch this team. And I would imagine you're a defense head yourself. I'm guessing that's kind of where you're at too.
Yeah, seeing Pascal get more pick and roll reps during the playoffs makes me like what they're going to do, probably more so in the regular season. The less isolation, maybe that means, but defense is where this team, finds its home. Defense is where this team tries to innovate, and defense is kind of what the Raptors have been known for some time. So I think it makes sense that people would kind of, clasp onto this as the identity.
Absolutely. We're going to continue on here and dig into the other side of things with Precious and sort of what the things are on offense outside of the three-point shooting that we already kind of talked about off the top that he can improve in order to be a very reliable, almost no-brainer starter for this team. We'll get to that in just one sec, but just a reminder, next week, all week long on Locked On NBA, check out the show as we dig into the top 50 players of the NBA season per Bet Online, and all the hosts get in there and rip apart the list and share their grievances with what's going on. So be sure to tune into that each and every day next week at Locked On NBA on your favorite podcast apps and on YouTube. All right, Samson, let's round this out and flip back to the offensive side of the ball for Precious. We talked about the three-point shooting, and we talked about the lack of, let's say, desire to roll, the lack of contact made per screen. I don't know if that's a stat, but I think he would be very near the bottom of the league in that. All the different things that a center typically needs to do on offense to help kind of move the gears of an offense and keep things flowing. Do you have as much confidence in him doing that stuff as you do in the sort of, obviously the defensive side of things is so far ahead for him, but are you at all confident that those things will come along, or there's some red flags with what you've seen so far in various areas on the offensive end that kind of give you some pause that could maybe sort of be the limiting factors of what Precious's ultimate ceiling could be?
I think that there's a common sentiment that rolling is easy, that it's a simple skill, that screening is a simple skill. And I think it's because we see big men as unskilled typically.
Sure.
Rolling is really difficult to be good at it. It's all about mirroring your guard, keeping passing windows open and being available. And that's not just as a guy who is, rolling for your guard, but if they throw a skip pass, what are you doing to clear out space? If somebody, you can put your guy under the basket, and if there's a drive, then you're there for a lay down. It's just, there's so many different things that you have to be. DeAndre Ayton is a really good example of this, is that he's so good at reacting to Devin Booker and Chris Paul. It's a real talent to make yourself available all the time. And Precious, the reason why his offense started popping off when his shot was there was because he stopped doing big man things on offense. He wasn't doing big man stuff typically. It was that this guy was, banging threes and pumping and dunking on dudes' heads, putting the ball, getting right into the middle of the floor, and running out in transition. I don't think the pull-up stuff is there at all, but Precious, there's a reason that he thrives when he gets to play wing style basketball on offense, and that evaporates the moment he doesn't make threes anymore. So I hope he keeps making them. But it's tough to just say Precious is an incredible athlete. He'll figure out how to roll. Because rolling is Bebe Nogueira is a great example of a guy who there were very few players who knew how to work alongside Kyle Lowry, especially as a lob threat. It's Kyle is a guy who will seek out advantages as a passer that many other players won't.
Hmm.
And to be a mirror to that genius is more difficult than people think. I mean, me, myself, when if anybody asked me to screen and roll, I played guard all my life. It is literally like an alien language to me. I can't screen and roll. I don't know how to pace accordingly. And it's tough. So he hasn't shown really anything. So it's tough to say what will
Yeah.
happen, but he's young. He's
Yeah.
obviously working on some of that stuff. Maybe not as much as his, the wing skills, the on-ball stuff, but I I I think that there's room to be optimistic, but we don't have much film to make us feel that way. It's basically just saying, "Hey, this guy's young. He'll get better at something."
Look, and I think it's like fair to look at what happened last year with him and like where he started out and where he finished this season and say, "Oh, this guy's capable of immense growth in a short period of time." But that you don't want to put too much on a guy and say, "Well, just because that happened last year, that means it must happen this year." Development's not linear, all that, and things we say all the time, but. Yeah, I think that's sort of, I think obviously where the limiting sort of concerns come in, right? Is like, can he figure out how to set a screen properly? Like, again, we were so spoiled with Serge Ibaka and Marc Gasol hammering dudes vaguely legally over the course of the couple of years. Even Jonas Valanciunas was a killer screener, just because of the sheer mass of his freaking body and how he was able to kind of use that to his advantage. But it's not something that comes easy to everybody, and it just was not a thing Precious did well last year. And so, like, is there a point for you where the offense kind of struggles to the point so badly where you would move him out of the starting five in your hypothetical dream world where he is starting to start the year? Or is it something where you just kind of realign the responsibilities of the guys on the floor, maybe make Scotty or Pascal sort of more your primary middle of the floor option type guy, and maybe have Precious play that wing ball that he played so well last year?
That's interesting because it's dependent on growth from other players.
Hmm.
This team will obviously benefit greatly if Pascal and Scotty hit above the break threes. Pascal was
Yeah.
awesome shooting threes from the corner last year, but how often
Best
is
on the
Pascal?
team. Fun little
Yeah,
trivia I learned on the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast when Josh threw it at me. Yeah,
yeah,
it's a great little nugget.
right. But how often is he in the corner? Truthfully, right?
Yeah,
They like to keep
yeah.
him above the break so he can support second side actions and be a release valve. And
Hmm.
Scotty and yeah, Pascal, if they shoot the three better above the break than Precious, there's less pressure on that. But also, Precious, we saw last year. I mean, I enjoyed the Precious minutes all the way back in November when his true shooting was still like, what, 44% or something like that?
Malachi Flynn level true shooting. Yeah.
Right. And I still enjoyed it because the defense was such a treat to watch. And, the Raptors were a team that didn't succeed on the typical merits of offensive skill. They got out and ran on the break a lot. And
Hmm.
they will be a better transition team this year if there's less Gary and less Fred on ball. Those guys need to be filling lanes, and that's something they can clean up really quickly. But Precious, it would be tough to convince me the shooting would have to be in such a bankrupt place to convince me
Sure.
that the starting lineup because the thing is that if you play Pascal, the mix of Pascal, OG, Scotty at the five, they're gonna get smashed, dude,
Yeah.
just like they did last year. And I think it makes sense to roll Precious at the five and bet on his offensive upside than it is to expect Scotty, Pascal, and OG to actually truly hang with other front courts. It's just too much to ask.
Yeah, totally fair. I can't wait to watch Precious this season. I think he's going to be an absolute riot. And, again, the ups and downs of Precious are kind of the joy and charm of watching Precious as well. As much as it's fun to watch him put it on the deck and dunk on Joel Embiid, it's also partly fun and charming to watch him boot the ball out of bounds when he's totally uncontested. I haven't really asked you this a whole lot because we have just kind of not chatted a ton in the off season because I think we've been trying to live balanced lives, which is nice. But this might be the last time we chat before the season gets rolling here, Samson. I'm curious, just like your general feelings on the team going into the year. Like it feels like this thing where the Raptors didn't do a whole lot to go and get better outside of Otto Porter, and they're banking so much on eternal growth, and that feels unsexy when the Cavs and the Hawks and the Sixers and the Celtics are all loading up. I really personally couldn't give a damn about what those teams are doing. I kind of feel like what the Raptors are doing and the sort of patience they have, is totally to be appreciated and celebrated in a lot of ways. So, where are you? Like, do you kind of view this as like a season where maybe things fall back a little bit in terms of the standings and maybe even the win total, but actually it's still a very fun, cool season that probably is a forward step developmentally? Or are you thinking they can hang with the Cavs and the Hawks and the sort of middle tier teams in the Eastern Conference, potentially even flirt with a 4 or 5 seed?
I think they can definitely hang with the Cavs and the Hawks for sure. The
Hmm.
interesting aspect of this is that the Raptors are probably absolutely going to be better this year. They may not be better in the standings though.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
East is just in a really really strong place. The Celtics, they're a team that just went to the finals. The Bucks are going to be there. Miami is really interesting. It's just there's a lot of stuff going on in the East, and the Raptors continuity is I believe it's heavily correlated with winning minutes.
yeah,
And that happens, and so i.e. wins as well. And the Raptors
yeah,
are returning basically everybody.
yep,
And they add Otto Porter Jr., who is honestly, considering what the Raptors needed and what they currently like, as you said, he's played high level team defense. The Raptors need that. He's also, since he's come into the league, even as his body has kind of broken down a little bit, Otto Porter Jr. has been one of the best rebounding forwards in the NBA, and he shoots the hell out of the daggum ball. Like he should be a salve for so much of what the Raptors like to do. He should elevate a lot of their lineups. And the only thing is just like Nick, I think, will obviously love playing Otto Porter Jr., and I hope he doesn't run him into the ground. That's probably my only worry.
Yeah, they're gonna have to. Justin Champagny, baby, be ready for some fill-in work as Otto gets maintenance days, baby. That's that's
Hmm.
really hoping for rotation player Justin Champagny. I think
Me
that's the thing
too.
I'm hitching my wagon to this year, like unabashedly. And maybe that'll be a foolish decision, but who cares? Yeah, I'm with you, man. I think they're gonna be very good. I think they could even actually surpass last year's win total because of the continuity you talked about and the fact that the track record of Nick Nurse and the track record of the franchise is that they win a lot of games and they kind of have the formula for the regular season figured out. What that means for the playoffs and in the sort of sustainability of it all once it gets there, that's a question for future Raptors and future us. But I do think they're going to be just as formidable as the Hawks or the Cavs, and possibly in that range with the Heat or the Nets, those sort of two weirdo teams that we can't quite pin down, as opposed to the top three. Like it, anywhere from 4 to 9 would make sense to me, and I ultimately think that regardless of where the seeding is, like the internal growth is actually what's going to tell the story of the season and actually be the sort of defining thing success wise. And Precious is very much tied up into all of that. Samson, you are tied up into a lot of very good things. Where can people check out all of your awesome work?
I'm not sure how much I'll be doing at Yahoo this year. We'll see. I'll be doing lots and lots at Raptors Republic. And
Hell yeah.
for anybody who's interested in Raptors Republic, I think it's going to be a massive year. And so, if anybody, not just me, but all the writers over there, all the podcasters and stuff, I think just try and stay tuned with what everybody's doing over there. There's going to be a lot of great work. So, I'm excited just to work with everybody over there. And I think it's going to be cool. So, if I could say, just stay tuned with Raptors Republic, listener, viewer, whichever it is. And yeah, thanks for having me on, Sean.
Of course, man. Always happy to chat. It's always lovely to bring your expertise to the show because it certainly surpasses mine. We're going to wrap it there. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. You can find me on Twitter at Woodley Sean. You can follow, subscribe to, rate, and review the podcast on all your favorite podcast apps for free. You can also go to YouTube and hit the big red subscribe button there. You can't miss it. It's much appreciated when you support the show there as well. We'll be back again next week as we do a little tour around the Eastern Conference. We've got 3 episodes lined up, 9 segments, and we're going to talk with the hosts of what I perceive to be the other 9 best teams in the Eastern Conference outside of the Toronto Raptors. The Washington Wizards will be shoehorned in there because I needed a 9th team for clarity's sake. I think the Wizards are kind of butt, but we'll talk about them too. And we'll get that all started on Monday with a trio of chats with Brad Rowland of Locked On Hawks, Dave Ramil of Locked On Heat, and Kane Pittman of Locked On Bucks. You have that to look forward to. Until then, have a wonderful weekend, and we'll talk to you Monday with another episode of Locked On Raptors. Bye-bye.